Hopefully I can be less boring today. It was super boring last week. No? You're shaking your head at me?
All right. Any questions, comments, concerns, cries of heresy?
Let's leave those for last. So let's get the other things out of the way first. And then once all the questions are settled, then we can light the torches.
Can you guys turn my mic down just a bit? Yeah, there we go. Okay, better. Oh, hang on. He's going to hand you the microphone.
I have a believer friend of mine who sent me a video about giants, and it would take me forever to find it because it was a while back, but he's a minister in Catlettsburg, Kentucky, a man that I go back a long way with. And in this video was a video of a living giant. This video was shot in 1923. And it was in Japan, and it showed this huge man who made everybody else look like they were that tall. And there was research done where bones were found of these superhuman, supersized skulls and femurs and ulnas and radiuses and all these bones of these huge people. So for skeptics, these people were here then and were still here in the 1920s at the time. And I will have this man resend this video to me and be something to check out. And with that, the end.
I guess with all the verses notating the giants, there's so many verses. How come there's so much debate? Because there's a lot of, people that I would listen to and follow in the past. I would say, well, they weren't giants. They were just rich, wealthy, powerful men. The men of renown weren't these giants, supernatural giants. I guess my concern is, why is there so much debate?
I would say largely, it's because it's easier to deny it, right? You get to Psalm 82, which we've looked at multiple times, and it says very plainly, again, if you read it, especially in Hebrew, but there are some translations that translate it very well. It says, God stands in the midst of the divine council and he judges the gods, right? Well, if you go read most popular commentaries on it, you find most of the scholarly work on it is they say, well, it's judges. He's talking about human judges. He calls them gods. That just means judges. Why? Based on what? And that's really all it is. They just say, well, he couldn't be judging gods. Israel was a monotheistic people. They didn't believe in other gods. And so he must be talking about judges. Well, that doesn't fit the ancient understanding at all, right? The writer of Psalm 82 absolutely believed that God was judging these other beings. So I think there's this hesitance to accept anything supernatural because it's much more difficult to explain it. But again, if you were reading this passage, whether it's Psalm 82, Deuteronomy 32, what have you, back then, and not just from the Bible, you can find these other ancient texts. You have even the Epic of Gilgamesh. Gilgamesh is basically one of these hybrid beings himself. You have the Apkallu that are mentioned in Ugaritic texts, right? These beings that were essentially the same thing. They were thought to be these spirit beings came down and they produced these offspring, and this is them. This is not just the Bible. There's all these ancient peoples had very similar mythologies. So again, if you'd asked an Israelite from the time that it was written, he absolutely would have believed that. It's only really in our modern times that we try to shy away from it. And there's a lot of different ways. This is how you get into some, what we would call liberal scholarship, where like in Ezekiel, they say, oh, well, he saw all this stuff because he had seizures and he was brain damaged and he wrote down his visions, but these weren't things from God. This was just, he was sick and he wrote down what he saw or whatever. We try to explain away the supernatural. Now, I think we should have a mediating position. I don't think we should blame everything on the devil. I've mentioned that before. I don't think there's a demon behind every rock and all this kind of stuff. But we definitely can't neglect that there is a supernatural in this creation.
Yeah, I think to add to what you said there, it has a lot to do with, too, the kind of what you're saying there is the assumptions that you come to the text with, right? I mean, a good example, one you brought up, is that when you assume, whenever there in Psalms, whenever he says that he stands in the midst of the gods, well, we know that because we're in a position of monotheism now. When we look back, we know, well, there is only one true God, right? In the sense that the way that of who the Lord is, of who Yahweh is, we know there's only one God like him in that sense. However, you have to understand, as we're like coming at the text, it's not the way that the peoples have always viewed those things. And so when you come to the text, I mean, this is really important about when you're doing exegesis, when you're interpreting, it's about coming to the text the way that the people of the time were coming to it, because Scripture was written for us, but it wasn't written to us, right? And so the understanding for us as people that are looking back is, what are we supposed to pull out of this that the people of that time would have understood? And so I think where a lot of the controversy ends up coming from typically comes from more of some of the ideas that people approach the text with than it is necessarily within the text itself. It's just what I've observed, but yeah.
I know you can really go down deep rabbit holes on this topic with various fringe teachers talking about science and hybridization, and should we be concerned about this today? And how can we apply what we have learned today to our lives now? Like, should we be concerned that there is going to be a resurgence of Nephilim hybrid offspring type of creatures being formed?
Well, I think the reason that we have the narratives, like what we just read through in Joshua and 2 Samuel, was to understand that by and large, they were destroyed. Now, again, I would submit that the creation of those beings was fallen divine beings, right? Fallen angels, watchers, whatever class they're put into, fathering them. But if we take that, then you also understand, as we read a couple weeks ago from 2 Peter and Jude, that these beings that descended, they're not still out there continually making giant offspring. They were bound up. So they're not able to do that. We get these passages where they're being destroyed. They're being wiped out by Israel as well as the other people. We just read Moab and Ammon destroyed so many of them. So as time went on, they definitely got destroyed. And you think about the mindset of ancient man. If you've got this, this whole family of giants over here, you're probably terrified of them. And we know Israel was, because that was the event with the spies. So who's the first person you're going to turn on when you get terrified enough that you're actually going to try to take them out? You're going to go wipe them out, right? And that was largely, I think, what happened. Now, can we still see them today? I mean, I can't say that it's impossible. But I see no further incursions. I don't see any reason to think that there are still continually heavenly beings that are descending and creating these things. I don't think God is still recreating new heavenly beings right now that would then continue to fall. I don't think there's an infinite number of them, right? So from the evidence that we have, I don't think there's necessarily reason to be concerned. I know I've heard some of the theories about hybridization and this idea that, it's going to be DNA splicing, we're going to be creating them in a lab and that sort of thing. I don't really buy that just because they weren't created in a lab to begin with. Humans couldn't produce giants, right? It took these supernatural beings to produce them.
Just to follow up on that, you mentioned earlier some of the extra biblical texts from which we can learn things, or from which we can gather other information. And you mentioned Enoch 1 as one of these extra biblical texts, and I know that it may even mention in Scripture, I can't actually remember, that one of these watchers taught the mixing of species, and that this was something akin to science or alchemy or sorcery or something that can actually be learned as far as like mutations, etc. Do you put any stock in that, or is that just like?
Well, again, we have to view it, because although First Enoch is not, I mean, it wasn't written by Enoch. It's probably going to burst somebody's bubble. But the Hebrew language didn't exist at the time of Enoch, right? And largely the portions that we have of it was most likely an Aramaic text. But either way, it definitely predates the New Testament, and the New Testament authors used it, right? Again, because we have 2 Peter and Jude, they quote from it. The fragments that we have from, for example, the Dead Sea Scrolls show, I think, they're dated to about the 3rd century BCE. Right? So a few hundred years before Yeshua was even born, at the very least. So we have to view it from how they would have seen it. What it seems to be is this, and there were various fallen beings, there were various watchers that taught mankind different things. So this one taught potion making or drug sorcery, basically. This one taught various types of metallurgy, so how to make weapons, right? And then, yes, one of them, it talks about the mixing of kinds, right? The intermingling of species and so on. We do see some of that within nature already. You ever seen a liger? Mixing of a lion and tiger. Those aren't naturally supposed to mate, but they can. Tygon is the other one, depending on which one was the father, which one was the mother. You have donkey or mule, right? It's a hybridized offspring. We see it even within plants, right? You have, I think, cabbage and broccoli are hybridized versions, or one of them's a hybrid, So we see hybridization that can occur within our natural realm. What we don't have is that supernatural level, because we ourselves are physical humans. So we can hybridize certain things, mixing certain kinds. We're not supposed to within bounds, but we ourselves, being simply earthly beings, we don't have that supernatural piece to then hybridize with something else. Does that make sense?
Yep. So we shouldn't be concerned about like more Nephilim showing up, right?
And what was the question?
So we shouldn't be concerned that there's going to be, as you said, another incursion.
I don't think so. I see no indication of that. That seems to me, my opinion, to be a big enough thing that we would see it prophesied in Scripture, right? Especially when we start talking about eschatology. I mean, if you started seeing a resurgence, another falling, another rising of giants, and, this is a sign of the end, giant armies and giant nations and all this, I would think we would get that prefigured somewhere. I know there's a lot of conspiracies about Nimrod and the dragon and the beast, and he's going to be resurrected, a giant, and all that. I don't think that at all fits with what John was trying to convey in Revelation to his audience then, or even the portions of Revelation that I think are yet still future.
Wanted to say as a follow-up to what you just said, I do know that one passage people generally use as a proof text to say there will be giants in the future is generally, I think it's in Matthew and in Luke. The one I'm going to read from is Luke 17, and I've heard this said from people that generally promote the fact that the return of the Nephilim, and it's this phrase, as it was in the days of Noah, which we've all heard, right? As it was in the days of Noah, so shall it be, and we see that. We've seen that before, and I've heard that from a lot of people a lot. Well, as it was in the days of Noah. Well, what was in the days of Noah? Giants, right? That's what's happening in the story. And so you kind of hear that often. But if you look at the way that that's being used in the text, that's actually not what Yeshua is referring to, right? So you look at like Luke 17. And he said to the disciples, "The days will come when you long to see one of the days of the Son of Man, and you will not see it. And they will say to you, 'Look there,' or 'Look here.' Do not leave and do not run after them. For just like the lightning, when it flashes out of one part of the sky, shines to the other of the sky, so will the Son of Man be in his day. But he must first suffer many things and be rejected by this generation. And just as it is happened in the days of Noah, so it will it also be in the days of the Son of Man." And then he goes on to say, and he explains what he means by this, people were eating, they were drinking, they were marrying, and they were being given in marriage until the day that Noah entered the ark and the flood came and destroyed them all. It was this, and then he goes on to say, it was the same as happened in the days of Lot. They were eating, they were drinking, they were buying, they were selling, they were planting, they were building. But on the day that Lot left Sodom, it rained fire and brimstone from heaven and destroyed them all. It will be just the same on the day of that the Son of of Man is revealed. On that day, the one who will be on the housetop, and then he goes on to talk about the one that's taken and what's left. The point being, what God is talking about here isn't, he's not talking about giants, right? The context of what Yeshua is referring to here is he's talking about judgment, and he's talking about people just kind of living their lives generally, and then judgment just coming. The reason why people generally refer to just Noah, and they'll say, well, and they stop at Noah, but they don't go on to read that it was talking about Lot too. Well, in the story of Lot, in that particular context, there's no mention of giants in Sodom, right? And so we can't then infer that it's also referring to that this particular passage is about giants. And so people will use that particular passage. I've heard it over and over. People will use that particular passage, and I think it's worth bringing up, as you said, there's no scripture that mentions any prophetic, but people use that as saying, hey, this is prophetic to refer to giants. But anyways, I saw a hand here. Okay. Yep.
Text out of context is a pretext for a proof text.
Right.
As soon as my wife gets back here, she has a story. And it's something I was a witness to, and it's about supernatural. For anybody that doubts that there's not demons and things that can happen that are unexplained, we experienced something a couple of weeks ago that was like, wow. And she can describe it better than I can. So when she gets back, if you don't mind, let her talk about this, because it was like unbelievable. Never seen anything like it in my life. So we'll give her a minute.
Yeah, I do have one on a couple. Did you have something, Maria? Okay, yeah. I've got a couple online too, so you go ahead.
You said that the giants are right now, they are trapped or they've been bound.
The Watchers.
Okay, the Watchers are the ones that are bound.
The fallen beings that fathered giants.
Okay, the fallen beings that father the giants
Yep.
are the ones bound.
Yep.
So if there are anything that's currently on Earth, what would it be? Like any fallen being on Earth, what would it be considered? Just demons, or
Well,
like if there is anything evil on Earth, what would it be, and how would we as believers combat it, or like approach it, or what should we think of it?
yeah, so to the first question of what would they be, I mean, there's demons, right? Now, demons are not fallen angels. That's I think, common misconception that this angel fell and it became a demon. They're different beings. Angels left their former estate, right? Went after strange flesh. That's what, was it Jude, I think, mentions that. And they fathered the Nephilim. Well, when the Nephilim died, their disembodied spirits, essentially, which were not a divine sanctioned creation, their disembodied spirits became demons. So, or at least again, that's the Second Temple era literature that we have from First Enoch Jubilees and a couple other ancient texts. That's what the first century Jew during Yeshua's time would have told you that demons came from. So the idea that Nephilim died, their spirits became demons. That's where demons come from. Because their body was flesh.
So there's a limited number then?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, and it also explains where they come from, because you'd have to wonder, did God make demons, and if so, why? Right?
Gotcha. That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
I've never asked it, and I was like thinking about it, so.
And it kind of gets into why do people get possessed by demons?
Yeah.
Why is possession a thing? Why don't they just, otherwise oppress people? Well, again, if these were things that they used to have a physical form and they lost it, it makes sense that that's what they're trying to get back, to reattain, is again a physical form. But yeah, and that's the second part of the question. That gets further into, again, a future episode, shall we say. So I'm going to kick the can down the road on the rest of it. But yeah, we will, here within just a couple weeks, we're pretty soon going to be wrapping up the material that's leading up into where we get to the time of the New Testament. And then we'll get into a lot of material from the Gospels, especially encounters with demonic forces. Because we see Yeshua show up on the scene, and he's casting out demons, and like, wait. I just read Genesis to Malachi, or 2 Chronicles, depending on what kind of Bible you have. I read all this. I see like one or two references to demons over here. Oh, goat demons in the wilderness. And then suddenly I get to the Gospels, and there's demons everywhere. Like people left and right are possessed. Why? What's going on here? So we'll get to that. Hopefully offer a satisfactory answer to that question. But yeah.
Anything else? I have a couple online. The first one is, should we conclude that anyone today considered quote-unquote giants are damned, or should we conclude that anyone who comes to Yeshua is redeemed? And the question that is being asked here is specifically within reference to, I think, giantism. I saw that somewhere, but now I'm not seeing it. Anyways, so people that are considered giants, are they damned?
By default, just because somebody's really tall, or even what we diagnose as giantism, I can't say that that's the case by default. Ultimately, I don't have an answer because I can't make that determination. I can't speak to someone's level of damnation or not. Again, see, it's a boring answer.
We need you to judge for us, please.
Yeah. See, I get boring again because I don't want to be judgmental.
I think we can safely say that. I think we can safely say that anyone, regardless of their genetic disorder, anyone who calls on the name of Christ Jesus and declares him as Messiah and repents is redeemed.
Yes.
Yeah, the question's more to the other end. So like the Nephilim themselves, right? Could they have been redeemed? This hybrid offspring that whose creation God did not sanction, he sent the Israelites in to wipe them out, right? Could they have been? I think it's more towards that question. Like I said, it's the same thing as angels. We got that question, I think, last week or the week before. Can angels be saved, right? The ones that they fell, they were bound and whatever. As best as I understand, the answer to that one is no. Because they're not human. I mean, it's the same thing as, well, can my dog be saved? That's going to offend somebody too.
It's kind of like similar to asking, can Satan be redeemed, right? It's like,
redemption of descendants of Adam is really what we're talking about.
Correct.
Descendants of angels kind of falls into a different category.
Yeah.
Angels, sons of God.
The next question is, okay, it says, this is from Paul and Lori Normando. Tinfoil kippa time. If conspiracy theories regarding current day transhumanism be somehow, if conspiracy theories regarding current day transhumanism be somehow connected to the hybridization of the ancient Nephilim, it kind of went into what were talking about a little bit ago.
Yeah. There's whole movements of transhumanism. Some is within like gene splicing, some is cybernetics, right? There's this whole idea of essentially, well, we can replace our organs, we can replace parts of our physical bodies, or we can create hybridized human beings. All of this, I would still say, falls within the realm of the physical world, right? Because at no point can we suddenly just create a son of God. Right? We can't create this divine being, this watcher, angel, whatever. The supernatural is outside of the physical. We call it supernatural because it's above natural. So it's not even within human ability to create an angel, right? So if we can't do that, then we can't recreate what generated the Nephilim, being the hybridization of watchers and humans.
Right. And there's one other comment here. It's believed that the demons are the spirits of the children of the fallen angels. So basically what you had said earlier. Yeah, which I think you're going to get into in future.
Yeah, demons are so the watchers, their descendants were the giants. That's the Nephilim. So the Nephilim, when they died, their spirits are the origin of demons. Or so the theory goes.
Felix wanted me my husband said something about what happened. I think I told you about this at Tuesday study, when my mirror came flying off my dresser and came to the side of the bed. And I'm still shocked by it, because that mirror should have hit me in the head. And it didn't. It fell on the side of the bed with the mirror facing the bed.
It was like it was laid down.
No, it's not an old mirror.
It was like somebody walked into our house, picked this thing up, and laid it down on its side. And I heard this boom outside.
Yeah.
And my neighbors next door are doing mechanic stuff all the time, so I'm thinking there's something outdoors.
Well, no, the boom was in the house. The boom was when the mirror hit the floor.
It sounded to me like that.
So I don't know. I mean, there was a picture that knocked over, and I had like a squeezable aloe bottle on the corner of the dresser. That was on the bed, and aloe was squirted out of it on the bed, and it's like, okay. I have no idea how that happened.
Nothing.
I was like in shock. Nothing was broken. So I have no idea what supernatural thing that was.
Yeah.
But it's a praise nonetheless,
Yeah.
right? Praise of protection.
I would say that, yeah, there's a praise report there because who else? It's not in the head but my Heavenly Father, Yeshua HaMashiach.
Good time.
You know, he knows everything that's going on, you know? So he saw it, he stopped it. So if there was whatever they call a spirit of evil, he did not let the spirit of evil take place over me. Because, you know, he knows my heart.
Yeah, yeah. It's interesting because there is a careful balance between kind of what you had said earlier, there not being a demon behind every bush, and recognizing the legitimacy of spiritual entities that exist. I mean, I'm a highly skeptical person when it comes to certain claims about things. But man, I've had some really weird experiences, specifically when I was in Cambodia, that I can't explain in any other way other than spiritual entities. I mean, it's just wild stuff, weird, just super weird things. And so, things I'm not going to say on a live stream. So, but that said, you know, so, but yeah, so there is a balance between not attributing every struggle that we have in life to a demonic force, a demonic entity. You know, we can be free. We can be, Yeshua is enough to free us of our bondage from sin, right? We don't have to worry about demonic forces oppressing us in such a way that hinders us from sanctification, you know? We don't need to be fearful of these things. We don't need to be in a place where we're worried. You know, some questions have been asked in past things. We don't need to be worried about going and participating in things and bringing the boogeyman home with us, you know. But at the same time, we do need to be mindful that those things that exist, they exist in the world, and as believers, through Yeshua, through the authority of Yeshua, we do have authority over those things, and we need to lean on that authority and recognize that we are in a battle, not just, that is not flesh and blood, but against spiritual forces, you know. And so, yeah. Any other questions, thoughts? Right.
Oh, I can't forget Brian.
I can do the microphone over here.
Okay, cool.
It's easier. Thanks, Jeff. So I had some questions, some history, some geography, some recent literature and thought. So Dr. Chuck Missler was a physicist. He's also a Bible scholar. I believe he was a Navy admiral. But he had a whole video on the Return of the Nephilim. And his basic concept is that, you know, Satan's the prince of the air, which we see the recent UFO phenomenon, but also that these disembodied Nephilim, these demons, are trying to make a synthetic body. And that's what the UFOs are, is basically a synthetic body. And some people have described the cherubs as similar to like a gray, whatnot, but these are basically trying to make synthetic bodies. And to once again be worshipped. Because as they're in Roswell right now, there's actually a religion where they worship UFOs. So thoughts on that? That's the first question.
Well, the first thought is humans are awful, and we will worship anything. That's the first thing. I'm not enough of a subject matter expert to speak to UFOs. What I would say is the image that we see, especially in the Gospels, these beings, and again, you could say, well, but that's not what the Bible says. The Bible doesn't actually say where they come from. You can't lean on First Enoch and Jubilees and other Second Temple writings and a lot of them. But whatever. You can say, well, you can't lean on that. That's not the Bible. Okay. Well, then you're still left with the question of they came from somewhere. And apparently they have a thing for possession, because that's what they do. That's straight out of the Gospels in Acts. So there is a reason that they're doing it. So either way, we're still left with that problem. The idea that they could create something that they could inhabit, some sort of synthetic body, some sort of physical thing. I would wonder how you could create it if you weren't yourself physical, But that gets into metaphysics, and that's not my area either.
That's the theory behind the transhumanism. Is the purpose of the transhumanism is to make something that can be inhabited.
Yeah, but apparently in the first century they could already inhabit humans. So that's already possible. But again, I don't know. I don't know enough one way or the other to have an informed opinion.
And there's another book. It's not as popular. Devils, Demons, Return of the Nephilim, Spears, Klein, and Christopher. And they have some historical references. And they posit that it was the Nephilim, being actual fallen angels and whatnot, descendants of fallen angels, was very popular in Judaism until about the 4th or 5th century, even in Christianity. And around the Council of Constance, around the 4th or 5th century, all of a sudden the Catholic Church took a drastic turn against the idea that these fallen angels, where these men of renown were actually spiritual beings or actually half angel, and he just kind of downgraded them to humans, and that dreams and other things, and that were very common and looked highly upon, all of a sudden were kind of shunned around the 4th or 5th century. And right now we see German textual criticism where anything supernatural is completely cut off, like Jeff talked about Ezekiel. So we had that recently in the last century, the German textual criticism. So I guess at what point early in church history did they kind of shut that off, or did they kind of turn against that? Was that accurate, or was it earlier or later, or is that Catholic or Protestant where they just shut off anything supernatural?
Well, the parting of the ways, as we talk about it, the divergence of Christianity and Judaism, they started from, we'd say, common stock, right? Because during the time of the apostles, there wasn't a distinction. In fact, that's what caused many of their issues. They're like, well, but they're not Jews, but they are Jews. Well, but they're not. But it's the same God, Even the Romans didn't get it, right? So as they began to diverge, they still shared many of the same common beliefs. And again, with stuff that we've dug up, we found amulets, right, that were made during the rabbinic era and just prior to that, where they would essentially have a passage of Scripture or some sort of blessing inscribed on something they would wear, thinking this would ward off evil spirits. So the idea was there that they did absolutely believe these things could come onto you, whether that's possession, oppression, or anything in between. The Jews absolutely believed in it.
The evil eye.
The evil eye. You have the Hamsa, right, the image of the hand with the eye on it. All of those things stem from an earlier sort of tradition and idea of warding off evil spirits. That's really what's at the core of it. And the early church also believed in the giants. Tertullian, for example, was a huge proponent. Tertullian argued until his deathbed to include First Enoch in the canon of the Bible. And he said the only reason that he accepted that he was wrong about it was because all of his contemporaries said no to it. He said, well, if everyone else says no, then I must be the one that's wrong. But it wasn't until he was on his deathbed that he actually let that go. And one of the things that they needed First Enoch for was because of this, right? This explanation of where do demons come from? Where do these oppressive spiritual beings originate from? And one of his reasons was because, they have this letter of Jude that quotes. It says, Enoch is seventh from Adam, right? And it quotes the book of Enoch. So you have different sorts of ideas, and of course, among the Dead Sea sect at Qumran, there was a lot of demonology, right? That's where a lot of these texts come from. They talk about Mastema. It's this being that they say is like a prince of demons, whether he was one of the original Nephilim that fell or was killed or whatever. There's this whole sort of theological system, this whole demonology built around it. So Jews, even in various sects, minus Sadducees, of course, absolutely believed in various types of spiritual and demonic entities. The early church did until, they got to a certain point. And it's hard to say because there were still so many different groups. So you mentioned believing in the supernatural in general. I think some things were an overreaction. For example, the church began to reject dreams and prophecy and everything because of the Montanists, right? Because they took this whole idea of, hey, we're the brand new prophets. We don't really need these scriptural texts. We'll just give you prophecies.
The early charismatics.
Basically, yeah. And so the push against that was like, no, that's heresy. Then also pushed away anything that was considered supernatural. And so just sort of over time, and then we get into more of a modern era. You mentioned German, the 18th, 19th century German high criticism, we call it. It was very much secular humanism. It was very much naturalist, and it was anti-supernaturalist. So it was this idea of, well, we know there are no such thing as spiritual entities, so let's find a way to explain why they're making these references. Like I said, well, Ezekiel had a tumor and he had seizures, and that's why he was writing crazy stuff.
Malcolm Gladwell did a whole series for, I think, the New Yorker he works for, on gigantism, the medical condition, as Hans mentioned. And he was basically saying, well, Goliath just had gigantism. He wasn't actually giant. He couldn't see, and they had to lead him out to the battlefield because he can't see. He had bad knees, and this kind of thing.
Yeah, there's a lot of that. And there's debate over whether or not the translator of 1 Samuel in the Septuagint rejected this supernatural worldview because they shrunk Goliath. Right, you have over here, it says he was 9 feet tall, but the Septuagint says he was 6 feet tall. Right? That's not that much taller than normal people.
The average Roman soldier was 5'5" and a half.
Yeah, I was actually going to bring that up as a kind of a, I don't know, if you had anything else, Brian. You
It's a geography question, but go ahead.
No, go ahead.
Thank you.
No, you go ahead. No, you go ahead.
So moving on geography, the Golan Heights, is that the same as Bashan, or is that slightly different?
I am not good with modern Middle Eastern geography at all.
And the Romans had a similar concept of a place called the Gates of Hell. I think they worship Pan there, but it seemed to be a different location.
Don't spoil it.
Oh, sorry.
We're going to come back to that in like 2 weeks.
So if you're going to address the connection between Jesus saying the gates of hell and this verse you talked about today, would not prevail against it. If Jesus is commenting on that or a modern, more current to his time geographical location or whatnot, we'll just talk about that later.
Yeah, when we get to the Gospels, there is, I have a whole spiel on his statement about the gates of hell, based on where he was standing and what that place was, and what it meant to like literally every person standing there listening to him talk.
I want to ask about Sihon. If he's the king of the city, guarding the gates of hell, is like basically Cerberus in human form. Would he be Hades or Pluto to these people?
In a way. Now, the problem with a lot of these ancient peoples is because they were largely wiped out, and we don't have a lot left about them. Until really the early 19th century, we lacked a lot of knowledge about the ancient Near East, various areas. We know from the Hebrew Bible and a couple other little things here and there, we know that these people existed and maybe they believed this or that. We didn't have a lot of information. When we started digging up Ugarit, we found a lot of texts there. Most of them were just regular day-to-day stuff, essentially like a grocery store receipt, that sort of thing. Some of them were a personal diary. One of them was a recipe for a cure for hangovers. I'm not making that up. That's an Ugaritic text that's been dug up. Seriously.
A lot of beer back then.
So all kinds of stuff. But a lot of it was referring to how they combined their religious life into their everyday life, because to them, the gods were everywhere and did everything.
Everything's a ritual.
Right? And so they would make references to this god and that one and whatever. And so our knowledge of the ancient Near Eastern world has greatly increased over the last 150 years because of the things that we've dug up and we've learned from it. And then comparing it, okay, well, this is said in the Bible, and this word is basically this one in this language, and it refers to this guy who has the same description over here, but we've got so much more background information on this. It helps us reconstruct how the ancient Israelites themselves would have viewed it being contemporaries in that world.
So the last question, feel free to kick the can. So Joshua being a symbol of Yeshua later on, Joshua defeating Sihon, I think it's, don't know how to pronounce some of these words. Would that be symbolic of Jesus defeating hell? Like Joshua defeats the king of hell, and then Jesus defeats death and Hades later?
In a nutshell, yes.
Okay.
I mean, really, that is sort of the same thing. We get from different Gospels different portrayals of Yeshua. For example, Matthew likes to portray him as Moses. He likes to portray him ultimately as the fulfillment of all prophecy. Luke likes to portray him, first of all, as he's Jewish and he's specifically the son of David. He is the Jewish Messiah. We've been waiting for him. Here he is. So the different Gospels have different portrayals, but you can't help but understand, especially when we get into some of the geography of the first century. Like you mentioned, the gates of hell, where was he standing when he said that? And how would his audience have viewed that when he said, the gates of hell, like, oh, we're standing here. What did that mean? And then knowing that they had essentially the same name. Right? You can't help but make those sorts of connections. You know the story of Joshua. You know they came in. You know they killed giants at the gates of hell. Right? So these are all the sorts of things that the ancient reader and the person experiencing it in the first century would have had in mind that we've lost because we're moderners and we, as John Walton says, we swim in a different cultural river.
I was going to say, Yeah, so it's interesting you brought that up because I was actually going to bring it up as well. That there is a bit of a dispute over the height of Goliath, and that Septuagint and I believe the Dead Sea Scrolls actually put him at about 6'8", roughly. And
But they didn't measure it in feet to be
right. Yeah,
The equivalent.
these are later. These are people that are trying to make sense of
the
the
equivalent number of cubits.
Yes.
Basically.
Correct. And that it was actually the later Masoretic text that kind of made him probably a bit taller. And it's just interesting because there are some, and this is more of a discussion over Oneg we can have some like today, I guess, but it is interesting because Goliath is really one of the only figures that we see in the Old Testament that isn't explicitly stated as a member of the Rephaim or the Anakim or anything like that. It just refers to him as Goliath from Gath, and then it refers to him as it refers to his weapons being large, right? But it doesn't actually say that he's an actual member of. He's actually a descendant of the Anakim, right? And so I just think that's interesting at the very least. And whether he's a giant or not, I don't know that it makes a huge difference. I mean, I don't know if you guys have I've actually been in the presence of NBA basketball players before. It's like 6'8", like that's LeBron James height right there, okay? That's almost like, I think it's exactly how tall he is. And I don't know if you've ever been in the presence of an NBA basketball player, but they might as well be Nephilim. I mean, it's ridiculous when you're standing with them, how tall they actually are and how like...
You really look up to them.
Yeah. It's unreal how tall they really are. So anyways.
Not many people can walk in those shoes.
Do I?
Not many people can walk in their shoes.
That's right.
No, but you could go skiing in their shoes.
It's true. So anyways.
Yeah. I would say on the note of Goliath, it doesn't call him Rephaim. But the way it parallels the language with other things, like we just read in Samuel, it describes of the Rephaim, right? Descendants of the Rephaim. It says it for each one. It describes their weapons, their armor. With I think it was Og, it describes his bed.
Right.
It's a huge, large bed, right? Which, mind you, the numbers given for the dimensions of his bed were the same dimensions alleged to have been the ziggurat that they were building at Babel. So again, you have this thing in mind where this god, right, this giant sleeps, is symbolic of this ziggurat that they were building, which was where the gods sat, right? The resting place of the gods as they tried to make themselves gods. So it's all these sorts of things that maybe it's just coincidence, but it seems a little bit too much to be coincidence. And the same thing with Goliath being from Gath, where they fought all these giants, having large weapons that it mentions specifically, just like it does with all these other giants. Regardless of his height, I would contend that the ancient Israelites definitely believed that he was belonging to the Rephaim. More questions?
Anybody else?
Brian.
So the last question's for you. So cubits, there's an Egyptian cubit, Hebrew cubit, et cetera, different races, different heights. I know if you're close to Sudan, you're going to get some incredibly tall cubits. If you're going elbow to middle finger, where a lot of the Egyptians took their slaves from, like Nubia. So, but Hebrew cubit probably a lot shorter. So would that have any bearing on the different translations of how tall he was if they're trying to translate cubits into some kind of measurement in their system?
I feel like I've heard this argument from SDAs before over which cubit's the right cubit because of the tabernacle dimensions and all that. Best that I can say is a Hebrew writer is going to use his definition for cubit. I mean, if he's the one writing it saying, hey, this thing was this tall, he's describing how tall he viewed it as. That or it's intentional hyperbole otherwise.
And one more question before Felix jumps in. So the Native American counting the fingers, the Plains Indians had the expression of holding one hand up. Do you think is there any bearing to that, to making sure no one has 6 fingers, or is that just like a rumor, internet rumor?
I have no idea. I mean, obviously it wasn't the norm, and the fact that they even mention it means it wasn't normal, right? To mention this guy that has 6 fingers on each hand and 6 toes on each foot, they do that because it was abnormal.
The cubit was from here to here, from here to here. The cubit was from here to here. Is that right?
Cubit was from the tip of your elbow to the tip of your finger.
Elbow to the tip of the finger.
Yeah.
Okay.
So again, the question really goes towards, if you had people that they were on average, 6'2", that their average height was 6'2", their arms are going to be longer than someone whose average height is 5'4". Right. So whose cubit, right, are we using as the definition there? There is a debate over that. It's just like with the tabernacle, when they're talking about the dimensions of it, are they using what was later be known as the Israelite cubit, or were they using the Egyptian one because that's the one they had learned being in Egypt? I don't know. I'll ask Moses one day and we'll see what he says.
One of the scriptures that we read, it said, according to the cubit of a man.
Right.
That was it. What does that mean?
Not according to the cubit of a cat. No, given the context, probably referring to man versus giant. Right? So describing them in our own terms, just so the reader would understand, hey, I know how long a cubit is, so I can figure out how big this thing is. Just a guess.
Okay,
Pretty good?
Cool.